Billionaire saw a single mom get evicted on TV. He recognized the address. It was his building. Julian Bakari was 3 bites into dinner, a glass of wine untouched beside his plate, when the breaking news banner cut across his living room television and stopped him mid-motion, fork halfway to his mouth. 1847 Kensington Avenue, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He knew that address before the reporter finished the sentence. He owned that address, not directly, not personally, but through Bakari Holdings, the real estate arm of the company he'd built over 15 years into one of the largest residential property portfolios on the East Coast. Kensington Avenue was one of nearly 400 buildings in his portfolio, a number large enough that he genuinely couldn't have named the property from memory a moment earlier. But the address wasn't what made him set his fork down slowly and lean forward toward the screen. It was the woman. She stood on the sidewalk outside the building, a garbage bag of belongings at her feet. 2 children pressed close against her sides, a boy who looked about 12 and a younger girl clutching a stuffed animal against her chest. The reporter was describing a wrongful eviction, a property management company that had allegedly falsified a lease violation to clear the unit for a higher-paying tenant, a family now standing on the street with nowhere to go on a night the temperature had already dropped below freezing. Julian recognized the woman's face before the Chiron gave her name, Marisol Dupree. He hadn't seen her in 19 years. He had never, in all that time, forgotten her. Julian had grown up with almost nothing. A childhood spent bouncing between his mother's overnight shifts and whatever arrangement kept him fed while she worked, until, at 17, a falling out with an aunt he'd been staying with left him effectively homeless for the better part of 4 months. He'd slept in his car when he had one, on friends' couches when he didn't, and eaten most nights at a 24-hour diner on Kensington Avenue, the same street he now understood with a jolt that his own company's building sat on, where a waitress named Marisol had noticed, within his first week of showing up alone and ordering the cheapest thing on the menu, exactly what was actually happening in his life. She'd never made him feel like a charity case. She'd simply started accidentally bringing him extra portions, telling him the kitchen had made a mistake, letting him sit in her section for hours doing homework under the diner's fluorescent lights without ever rushing him out. When his car got towed one particularly brutal January, she'd driven him to school herself for 2 weeks, out of her own way before he was too proud to keep accepting it and found somewhere else to sleep instead. She'd been for 4 crucial months of a life that could have gone very differently. The only adult who'd treated his situation like it mattered without ever making him feel smaller for being in it. He'd lost touch with her after he left for college on a scholarship he'd barely believed he'd gotten, the way people lose touch with the specific chapters of their lives they're trying hardest to leave behind. He'd thought about her over the years, wondered, occasionally, where she'd ended up, whether she knew what 4 months of extra pancakes and quiet kindness had actually amounted to in the life of the boy she'd fed. Now he was watching her stand on a sidewalk in the cold with 2 children and a garbage bag of belongings, evicted from a building that, however indirectly, belonged to him. He was in his car within 11 minutes, still in his dinner clothes, calling his chief operating officer from the back seat with a controlled fury he rarely allowed himself in business calls. "I need everything on the Kensington Avenue eviction, tonight. Not tomorrow morning, tonight." By the time he arrived at the building, the news crew had mostly dispersed, but Marisol was still there, sitting on the building's front steps with her children, wrapped in a blanket a neighbor had brought out, waiting for a family shelter intake that wouldn't open until morning. She looked up as Julian approached, and for a moment, recognition seemed to war with disbelief on her face. "Julian?" she said slowly. "Julian Bakari." "It's me," he said, crouching down to her level the way she'd once crouched down to a diner booth to check on a kid pretending he wasn't hungry. "Marisol, I saw the news. I own this building." Her face went through several expressions at once: shock, then something more complicated, a flicker of the specific weariness people develop after enough years of powerful men disappointing them. "You own this?" "I own the company that owns it," Julian said carefully. "I didn't know what was happening here tonight until I saw your face on my television screen 20 minutes ago. I need you to believe that, and I need you to let me fix it. What Julian's emergency call to his COO uncovered over the following hours confirmed exactly what the news report had alleged, and worse. The property management firm contracted to run several of Bakari Holdings' Philadelphia buildings, a company called Sterling Residential Management, had been quietly falsifying lease violations across multiple properties for the better part of 2 years, clearing out long-term rent-stabilized tenants like Marisol on manufactured pretenses, then releasing the units at significantly higher rates and pocketing the difference through a kickback arrangement with a leasing broker nobody at Bakari Holdings' corporate level had ever scrutinized closely. Marisol, it turned out, had been the 4th family evicted from that single building in 8 months, and the property management firm had specifically targeted tenants without the financial resources to challenge the eviction legally, exactly the kind of families Julian realized with a sick, particular clarity that he himself had once been one emergency away from becoming. I trusted people to run this the right way and never checked closely enough, he told Marisol later that night, after arranging emergency accommodation for her and the children at a hotel his company would cover indefinitely. That's on me, not an excuse, an admission. The fallout moved fast once Julian personally got involved. Sterling Residential Management's contract was terminated within a week, and Bakari Holdings launched a full audit of every property the firm had managed, ultimately identifying 11 other families across 3 buildings who'd been wrongfully evicted under the same scheme. Julian didn't handle the response quietly or discreetly the way his legal team initially recommended to limit liability exposure. He made it public, deliberately, offering full restitution, reinstated leases where possible, and a formal apology that named the failure specifically rather than burying it in corporate language. Marisol was offered her unit back, at her original rent, with a written guarantee protecting her lease terms for the next decade. She turned it down, gently, telling Julian she needed a fresh start somewhere that didn't carry the memory of standing on a sidewalk with a garbage bag and 2 frightened children. Julian didn't push. Instead, he helped her find a different property, not one of his own, deliberately, because he understood, without her needing to explain it, that she needed this next chapter to be entirely hers, not another kindness she'd have to carry gratitude for indefinitely. What he did insist on, over her repeated protests, was covering her children's education costs going forward, not as charity, he told her firmly, but as a debt 19 years overdue. You fed a homeless 17-year-old for 4 months out of your own paycheck and never once made him feel like a burden, Julian said. I've had the means to repay that 100 times over for over a decade, and I never once thought to look for you. I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you tonight. I'm doing it because I owed you long before tonight happened. Marisol, who had built her entire adult life around not needing anyone's rescue, finally accepted, not because her pride had changed, but because she recognized in Julian's insistence the same stubborn refusal to be thanked that she'd once brought to a diner booth 19 years earlier. Julian restructured Bakari Holdings' entire property management oversight in the months that followed, implementing direct tenant complaint channels that bypassed management companies entirely and reported straight to corporate leadership, a change born specifically out of the realization that he'd let 400 buildings and thousands of tenants become numbers on a portfolio spreadsheet rather than lives he remained accountable for. He and Marisol stayed in touch, an easy, unforced friendship rebuilt slowly across 19 years of missing context. Her children, now aware of the specific history between their mother and the tall, quiet man who'd shown up on their worst night, took to calling him Uncle Julian within the year, a title he never corrected and, privately, treasured more than almost anything his considerable fortune had ever bought him. You saved my life when I was 17 and had absolutely nothing, he told her once, watching her kids do homework at her new kitchen table. I just wish it hadn't taken evicting you from my own building for me to finally find a way to return the favor. Marisol looked at him for a long moment, the same steady warmth in her expression that he remembered from a diner booth nearly 2 decades earlier. You came the same night you saw it happen, Julian. Most people who could have helped wouldn't have looked up from their dinner at all. The end.